is compassion. The politics is purpose.
You may be termed out here, but does cleaning up the streets of California factor into a potential presidential run?
I'm never going to overpromise that in the short run. I mean, we are struggling in this state.
You're not answering my question.
No, housing and homelessness.
So the piece that I published is titled Newsom's National Model for Homeless, Racked by Fraud. It's published for Real Clear Investigations. There's original reporting in there. This is actual journalism. It's not just me commenting. In fact, I'm not allowed to share my opinion.
Something wild just went down. Ana Kasparian didn't just debate Gavin Newsom. She tossed him into a rhetorical tornado, slammed the gas, and strolled away like it was nothing. What started as a routine political back and forth quickly spiraled into a masterclass of savage comebacks, awkward silence, and one governor flailing for a way out. If you love chaos, cold hard accountability, and moments so brutal you can't help but gasp and laugh, strap in, because the ending hits like a ton of bricks.
To support building more reservoirs in the state in order to bulk up our water infrastructure because we live in a drought-prone state. That passed in 2014. Funding was attached to it. You want to know how many reservoirs have been built since 2014? Zero. This state is an utter joke because of the people who are governing it. Gavin Newsom right now is at the top.
Somewhere in the endless multiverse of political swagger, Gavin Newsom woke up that day thinking it would be another easy cruise. Polished talking points, flattering lights, and the comforting illusion that charm could pass for actual policy.
For me, when I signed on to criminal justice reform, what I thought I was signing on to was we're going to reform our prisons. But the idea of, oh, we're just not going to punish anyone for pretty much anything is not what I thought I was signing up for. But that's pretty much what we've gotten. And preemptively shutting down, 4 to 5 state prisons without really having a plan in place for what happens to oftentimes violent inmates was a disastrous idea by Gavin Newsom.
If you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button. It really helps more than you know. Instead of an easy ride, he walks straight into a conversational blender, running smoothly, efficiently, and with unsettling precision by Ana Kasparian. No flashing alarms, no dramatic soundtrack, just the quiet hum of logic revving up.
Look at the talent in the Democratic Party right now. People are going to get mad at me for saying this, but I genuinely feel there isn't much. I don't know who the next leader of this party is going to be. Everyone is kind of singing the praises of Gavin Newsom. I live in California. He's the governor here. He's a disaster of epic proportions.
Right.
Most Americans don't know that yet. But if he's going to be the leader of the opposition and if he's the Democratic candidate in 2028, I think this country's in a lot of trouble.
I mean,
Ana Kasparian didn't crash in like a wrecking ball. That would have been too obvious. She showed up like a librarian who already knows you skipped a book, yet still calmly quizzes you on chapter 7.
I don't know if I can.
Please,
Okay.
you must. It's a necessity.
So Democratic establishment candidates are full of shit. And I need people to understand that. And we need to get out of this vicious pendulum swing cycle where we go from one terrible administration to another terrible administration. They just have different branding. But in the end, they do nothing for ordinary people. And that's what people are hungry for. I think that's part of what explains the popular.
Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom started exactly where he always does. Confidence dialed to 11. Optimism flowing like it was on tap. Words so polished they could be framed in a campaign office. Everything sounded inspiring, even cinematic. If politics were judged on vibes alone, he'd have an Oscar by minute 3. But Ana Kasparian doesn't live in the land of vibes. She operates in the far less forgiving world of outcomes and consequences, the inconvenient details that show up uninvited and refuse to leave. She listened. She nodded. She let Gavin paint his picture. And then, with surgical calm, she started asking questions that gnawed at his narrative like termites in wood. Slow, quiet, relentless. The shift was subtle at first. Gavin spoke like someone used to friendly rooms, nodding faces and applause arriving right on cue. Ana responded like someone armed with receipts, spreadsheets, and a serious allergy to nonsense. Every hopeful abstraction he leaned on got pulled back to earth with a single cutting reality check. Okay, but how's that actually going? And you could feel it, the air changing. Not dramatically, just enough to make confidence start sweating.
In the first place, just let us keep our own money and then we wouldn't need all your stupid programs.
That's right. There's actually something called the corruption tax. It's not a real tax, but it's actually there. We pay more than we need to because of the corruption that politicians engage in.
There's a lot of BS out there about how it's working, when in reality it's not. We already have 2 federal criminal indictments related to this program.
I call it the unholy trinity of Gavin Newsom. You have the homelessness, which is a complete shambles, and also the speed rail that went nowhere.
Oh my God.
It's basically
What made it hilarious wasn't that Gavin said anything shocking. It was that he said all the familiar lines, the greatest hits, the political version of a worn-out playlist that still sounds fine until it's played next to reality. Ana Kasparian didn't interrupt the song. She just pointed out that the speakers weren't even plugged in. There's a special kind of comedy when someone keeps insisting progress is happening while standing right beside proof that it isn't. Gavin talked about leadership. Ana talked about results. Gavin talked about vision. Ana talked about lived experience. It was like watching someone sell a luxury car while the wheels quietly rolled away. And the best part? Ana never raised her voice, not once. That was the real flex. She didn't need volume. She had momentum. Every answer Gavin gave opened the door for a follow-up that made the previous answer look like it needed adult supervision. You could almost see Gavin's internal GPS recalculating, desperately searching for a route back to safe ground.
Gives you a sense of what these local politicians really care about, and it's themselves, their own political careers, and it disgusts me. Gavin Newsom, in every single interview I've seen him do, has passed the buck, even though he is the governor of this state.
Yeah.
He is pathetic. He's a snake. He's like the slimiest Democratic politician, certainly on a local level. But what we have seen is mismanagement of epic proportion.
At some point, the conversation hit that invisible line where confidence stops sounding confident and starts sounding rehearsed. Gavin Newsom leaned even harder into optimism, a classic first clue that optimism is just a flotation device. Ana Kasparian let it ride. She let the words stack up and then dropped something devastating. Specificity. Specificity is political kryptonite. You can't charm it away. You can't pivot past it. You either have it or you don't. Gavin tried to hover above the details. Ana calmly dragged him into the spotlight like, "No, let's stay right here for a second." Suddenly, the room felt smaller. The comedy came from how polite the takedown was. No insults, no smarks. Just a tone that made every pivot attempt feel like watching someone try to moonwalk out of a maze. The more Gavin zoomed out, the more Ana zoomed in. It became a tug-of-war between abstraction and reality. And reality? It has a nasty habit of winning when someone refuses to let go.
It's very likely that he is going to point to his signature homeless housing policy as what will be a national model for solving the very real problem of homelessness in the United States. And if anyone is enticed by his campaigning on that, you should know that that signature policy, known as Project Home Key, has been riddled with fraud, scathing audits, and at this point, 2 criminal.
What really made it hilarious was how familiar it all felt. Everyone watching has seen this movie before. The politician promises a brighter future. The journalist points to the present. The politician praises the system. The journalist asks why that system keeps producing the same problems. Gavin Newsom played his part perfectly. Ana Kasparian rewrote the script by refusing to pretend the ending was already happy. At times, it felt less like an interview and more like a performance review Gavin didn't know he was scheduled for. Ana wasn't hostile, she was thorough. And thoroughness? Terrifying when you're used to applause instead of follow-ups. Every unanswered question just sat there, growing heavier by the second, like an awkward pause that refuses to fade. There's something deeply satisfying about watching someone bring a PowerPoint mindset into a conversation full of bulletproof questions. Gavin came armed with polish. Ana came armed with clarity. And clarity doesn't blink. It doesn't rush. It just waits for the truth to catch up with the words. The sarcasm practically floated through the room without a single sound. But Ana wasn't grading on noise, she was grading on substance. Suddenly, all that polish didn't matter, because the questions weren't impressed.
Existence, and it is real, the existence of climate change should not be utilized as a talking point in order to pass the buck, in order to deflect blame, in order to refuse to take any personal responsibility for how poorly this state has been governed for several years now. I am so disgusted with these people. I mean, Newsom is the governor. He's the top dog in California.
The audience could feel it too. That shared realization that this wasn't a shouting match. It was something far worse for a politician. A calm, reasoned exposure of how thin the narrative gets once it leaves its comfort zone. Gavin Newsom didn't implode. He didn't snap. He just slowly ran out of space. Ana Kasparian has a rare gift, letting silence do the heavy lifting. She'd ask a question, let Gavin answer, and then pause just long enough for everyone to notice what wasn't said. That pause hit harder than any interruption ever could. It's the kind of silence that makes viewers at home lean forward and think. That's why it lingers. Because it didn't end with a mic drop. It ended with unanswered questions hanging in the air like unpaid bills. Questions that don't disappear when the cameras turn off. Questions that follow the story and tap it on the shoulder later.
Original reporting, I now understand for the first time in my life why it takes journalists sometimes months to work on a story and publish a story. But with that in mind, I want to share the details of what I've learned and why we need to hold members of our own party accountable when they're engaged in wrongdoing, when they're engaged in policies that actually end up stealing money from taxpayers while simultaneously making the problem that they're supposedly trying to fix a lot worse.
This wasn't Ana Kasparian trying to dunk on Gavin Newsom. It was Ana refusing to let him float above reality unchecked. And that's far more dangerous, because once people see that contrast, they can't unsee it. The funniest part, it didn't feel like a climax. It felt like the start of something uncomfortable. Like spotting the first loose thread on a sweater that suddenly looks very pullable. Ana didn't yank it, she just showed it was there. And once you notice it, it's hard not to keep tugging. That's where the real comedy sneaks in. Gavin didn't technically lose control of the conversation. He lost control of the illusion that he ever had it. That's a quieter kind of disaster. The kind that doesn't trend immediately but settles in later. When people replay the exchange and realize how often his answers sounded impressive, without actually answering anything. The room wasn't crashing, it was shaking. And instead of panicking, Ana calmly asked why the seatbelt sign was still off. That's the kind of question that doesn't explode on impact. It just rattles around in your head long after the conversation ends.
Well, essentially what he did was bail out PG&E, even though PG&E essentially started the fires in Paradise, California.
Right.
They couldn't be bothered to replace a $10 hook that was nearly 100 years old, and that hook was holding the power lines up.
Right.
So just think about that. These hooks are basically falling apart. Power lines are falling. We have dry conditions in California. And so it's a tinderbox. We live in a...
What made it even funnier was how much effort went into staying composed. Gavin never raised his voice, never snapped, never openly bristled, but you could feel the tension in the way his answers started to loop, that subtle repetition giving everything away. Ana Kasparian never went for the easy jab. She didn't reach for sarcasm. She let the moment create its own irony. Newsom talked about progress like it was self-evident, and the implication was brutal. It wasn't bad intentions holding things back. It was bad execution. That's a much harder charge to dodge. You can argue ideology, you can deflect criticism, but execution lives in the real world, where people notice when things don't work as advertised. Ana didn't accuse Gavin of not caring. She asked whether caring was enough, and that question landed like a tax audit on optimism.
I just care about a lot. And I think that as we head to the 2028 presidential election and basically deal with Gavin Newsom's campaigning, it's really important for people to understand what his leadership actually looks like. And one of the policies that he's very likely going to tout as what he sees as a national model is this Project Home Key policy. But fact of the matter is, it's just been one disaster after another. I'm not saying that...
The pacing of it all was almost cruel. Gavin Newsom would deliver a sweeping statement, the kind that sounds perfect clipped for social media. And then Ana Kasparian would narrow the frame, tighten the lens, and suddenly that grand statement looked painfully exposed. unsupported by specifics. It was like watching someone toss confetti into the air while Ana calmly pointed out there was no floor beneath it. By then, the contrast was crystal clear. Gavin represented the polished surface of governance, messaging reigning supreme, narratives carefully curated, insulation doing its job perfectly, until someone pokes a hole and lets the outside temperature rush in. Ana didn't rip the insulation away. She just opened a window. By the end, it felt less like a clash and more like a demonstration of what happens when power meets preparation, polish meets persistence, and a carefully managed narrative meets someone who refuses to take it at face value. Gavin didn't fall apart.